Imagine getting your period unexpectedly while you're outside your home. No modern pads, no period underwear, no dark jeans to hide the stain, and worst of all, everyone around you could potentially notice. So what did ancient women actually do when period blood appeared on their clothing? Because hiding a period stain thousands of years ago wasn't as simple as changing your clothes. And when the blood reached the outer layer, what could she actually do? In many ancient societies, women could use folded pieces of absorbent material. Cloth was one obvious option. A piece of fabric could be folded into several layers and positioned inside clothing. But it wasn't a modern pad. There was no adhesive holding it perfectly in place. It could shift. It could become soaked. And eventually, it could leak. That's where clothing itself became important. Many women wore long garments with multiple layers. Loose fabric could help keep a small stain hidden. Thicker or darker material could also make a mark less obvious. But imagine walking through a crowded street and suddenly realizing something had leaked through. Where could you go? There were no modern bathrooms designed for changing menstrual products. No store nearby where you could quickly buy another pad. No emergency supply waiting in your bag. A woman might have to find somewhere private, a room, a courtyard, a friend's home, or simply wait until she could get away from everyone. But escaping the crowd wasn't the only problem. What happened to the stained clothing? A blood stain couldn't simply disappear. Clothing had to be washed by hand. Water had to be found. And depending on where she lived, enough water for washing wasn't always easy to access. So hiding period stains wasn't only about preventing a leak. It was also about dealing with the evidence afterward. And here's where things get even more interesting. There wasn't one ancient solution. Ancient Egypt wasn't the same as ancient Rome. Rome wasn't the same as ancient Greece. And a wealthy woman didn't necessarily have the same options as a poor woman. Some women had better clothing, more privacy, more water, more household help. Others had none of that. So what happened when a stain simply couldn't be hidden? A visible stain could be embarrassing, especially in places where women's clothing and behavior were closely watched. But periods themselves weren't viewed exactly the same way everywhere. Different societies had different beliefs about menstrual blood. Some treated it as powerful. Others considered it something that should be separated from everyday life. And some ancient medical writers simply described menstruation as a normal bodily process. So the problem wasn't just the blood. It was also the culture around it. Still, ancient women weren't helpless. They lived with menstruation throughout their lives. They learned their cycles. They knew which fabrics were easier to wash. They could prepare materials in advance. They could use layers of clothing. And they could plan around places where privacy was available. But accidents still happened. A leak could happen while traveling, during work, during a gathering, or at exactly the moment she needed it least. And when that happened, there was no instant solution. No quick trip to a store. No fresh pad pulled from a handbag. She had to rely on whatever she had with her, whatever her clothing could conceal, and whatever privacy she could find. So how did ancient women hide period stains? Through absorbent materials, layered clothing, washing, planning, and privacy. They weren't perfect solutions. They weren't always comfortable, but they were practical ways of dealing with something women had experienced for thousands of years. Because sometimes, the hardest part of having a period wasn't the bleeding itself. It was making sure nobody else could see it.